Welcome to another watch along. I'm your host Kellerman, and today we're going to watch an interview with third-party presidential hopeful RFK. Now, we've watched a number of speeches by Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris, and I've been getting comments from people asking me to step outside of the main two parties and watch RFK speak. So, he is a presidential nominee. Let's listen to what he has to say. I'll put drinking game rules below if you want to get a little silly while we do this. Woo!
So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. joins us. We really appreciate your time. Just coming off of Albany, where you were testifying in the trial up there, I didn't want to start there. The importance of this for you. Why was this a priority for you to go and speak and to let your voice be heard and to see what this verdict is going to be at this point?
Well, I was the key witness, I would say, at the trial. So it turned out to be a 4-day trial. It was in Supreme Court, in Albany State Supreme Court. And the issue is and let me go back. After Ross Perot ran, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party wanted to make sure that an independent could never run again. So they made signature thresholds almost insurmountable. And New York has some of the
really hard. It's really hard for a third-party candidate to run.
45,000 signature, or 47,000.
And even harder to win.
45 days. We ended up getting 150,000 signatures. So we had more than enough to get on the ballot. And the Democratic Party, the DNC, is trying to keep me off the ballot in all 50 states. We now have enough signatures to get on the ballot in every state, something that we were told could never happen. We've collected over 1 million signatures, more than any presidential campaign in history. There's 1 million people, including 150,000 in New York, that have signed a petition asking that I be on the ballot. The DNC is trying to keep me off the ballot, and they're doing that now by saying I'm not really from New York State. I've lived in New York State since I was 10 years old, since 1964. My father ran for Senate that year. He was also, ironically, also called a carpetbagger. In other words, that he didn't really live in New York State. So 60 years later now, I'm running and I'm being told I don't live in New York State. My driver's license here, I vote in this state. My car is registered here. My law license is in this state, not California. My law office is in this state. I pay income tax in this state. Most importantly, you have to put the same domicile on every state in the country, so on all 50 states. And some of those states say your domicile has to be the place where you vote. I've never voted any place else in New York. I received legal advice. I had to name New York as the state. And, we have the best ballot access attorney in the country, and he said this is the only way to do it. So, I'm being accused of deceiving people about my domicile, but I took legal advice, and I was told you're going to be sued whether you claim Massachusetts where you have a house, California where you have a house, or New York where you have a house, and the only place legally that you can claim is New York.
I believe your team had one of their main defenses was that your intention to return after being in California. Why do you think that can hold up and that can factor into this verdict?
That's one of the key indicia of where you live.
I can hear him breathing over the other guy
houses,
talking.
The domicile is where do you intend to return to, even after a very prolonged outside stay. And I've lived outside of New York many, many times, but I've always claimed New York as my domicile because I always intend to return here. And I've had an agreement with my wife since we got married. I moved to California because she could not move. And when her acting career is done, she would come back with me to New York, and she would do Broadway or whatever. But that we would move back into the town of Bedford. I've lived in Bedford, in that town, for 40 years. I've had 13 different residents in that town. Some of them rental, some of them, that I've owned. But that's where
he's lived in New York.
Are you concerned at all about a precedent that could be sent here, depending on this verdict, depending on the other states, like you mentioned that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I listed New York in every state ballot, so if we lost this, we could technically be, challenged in every other state. We're going to win this, but it may take us an appellate decision because, sometimes, I think one of the issues that has been revealed recently is how politicized the courts are in New York. And so, but
Certainly.
we're very confident that we win this on appeal and that we win it in a federal, we're filing a federal lawsuit this week, which I think will preempt this whole issue.
One of the things that came out of this, some of the witness testimony, I thought was interesting is one of the witnesses talked about you and the relationship they had with you, and they said that you had changed in some ways, and some of the things you had said, and kind of changed the relationship.
It's like his mic's. It's like his mic's not on. It's only RFK's mic. We're hearing his questions through RFK's mic, and we're hearing his breathing.
People who were my original landlords, who were friends of mine, and who were distressed that I left the Democratic Party. But I don't feel like I changed. I feel like the Democratic Party has changed. That the Democratic Party, if you went down a list and checked a box for all of the issues and all of the priorities that my father believed in, that my uncle believed in, I would check every box. I grew up in the Democratic Party that was a champion of civil rights. It was a champion of voting rights. It wasn't trying to suppress voting rights. It was trying to protect freedom of speech and not suppress it. It was pro-life and bodily autonomy. It was against war. It was
pro-life and bodily autonomy.
Represented the American middle class and working people, cops, firefighters. Today's Democratic Party is more aligned with Wall Street and with big tech, and has kind of turned its back on the American middle class. And it was for public health. We were the champions of public health, and today we have the sickest population in the world. When I was a kid, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. And nobody in either party is asking the question of where are all these illnesses coming from?
You mentioned the party changing over the course of the years and your views aligning with your uncle and father, but
Just
some
doing
members of your
quick
family have
searches here,
endorsed
guys.
Joe Biden or Kamala Harris at this point. I guess, how do you explain, where in the family, I guess, would you explain that, and how did that make you feel at that point?
Well, my family
the sickest countries in the world
is pretty solidly ensconced in the DNC. So I think when I left the Democratic Party, that first of all, a lot of my family members worked for the Biden administration.
The United States on this list.
And those where they have arrangements with them as NGOs. And those were the family members that were most, I think, vociferous in opposing me. I have a lot of family members who are working for my campaign, who are very supportive of me. But I come from a family that, where we were raised, we were to debate each other, to differ with each other on different issues without hating each other. I love my family. I feel loved by them. And I understand, we had a 40-year friendship with Joe Biden. Joe Biden has a statue or a bust of my father behind him at the Oval Office.
69.
So, I understand why some of my family were troubled with the decisions that I made to oppose somebody who's been a friend for many years.
The America's Strong platform that you've released over the course of the past few weeks, a lot of the bullet points on there focus on the prosecution of public political figures. Why is that a priority?
Well, the America's Strong platform is about bringing Americans back together. We are always stronger as a nation when we are together, and we now have the greatest polarization and division in our country than any time probably since the American Civil War. And it's dividing our country, and it's making us that we have these tremendous problems, a $34 trillion debt. We have the chronic disease where we become addicted to war. We have the first generation in history that can't afford homes. That is going to live worse than their parents. We have food that is filled with 1,000 ingredients that are illegal in Europe because they're so dangerous and bad for health.
That's true.
All of these are solvable issues, but we can't solve them when we're hating on each other. So what I said at the beginning of my campaign is that I'm going to avoid the marginalization, the division, the name calling, the vilification of my opponents. I'm going to challenge them on issues with which I differ. But I'm not going to be calling them names, and I'm not going to be prosecuting them politically, and I'm not going to be silencing them. But
I do respect that. It really bothers me when the other candidates just attack the other side instead of
the values that
talking
bring
about
Americans
what they're going
together
to do.
that we all share in common, rather than focusing on the culture war issues that are used to keep us all apart.
One of the tenets of that platform that you're on, the America Strong, was be able to pardon.
There are issues that need to be talked about, obviously, though.
Would you pardon Donald Trump, who has some cases against him right now?
Well, what I said is I'll pardon anybody from either political party or their family members if I conclude after investigation that the prosecution was political. So I couldn't make that call now.
If he just decides?
People who would, who are respected, nonpartisan people, lawyers and judges, who would look at those prosecutions and say, if this was politically motivated, we're going, and it's not just them, it would be Edward Snowden, it would be Julian Assange to give him a real part, and it would be, people like Ross Ulbricht and others who suffered political prosecution, which I don't believe in. My father said, a week after he took control of the Justice Department, he called all the division heads and the branch heads into his office. And he said, we never ask whether somebody, a defendant, potential defendant, is Republican or Democrat. We need to persuade the American public that justice is actually blind, that there are no political motivations in this department. And that's important because Americans need to believe in their institutions. I mean, I'm right now, I would say that, I'm now, the Democratic Party is using the courts now to politicize them, to get me off the ballot, a ballot where 1 million Americans have said they want to see my name. And that's not the Democratic Party I grew up with. That Democratic Party was fighting for voting rights, not fighting to deprive people of their votes. And I don't think the courts should be, I was not given Secret Service protection for 18 months. That's part of the politicization, the widespread politicization that we've seen of our enforcement agencies. I've just won a lawsuit against the Biden White House for using the FBI, the CIA, for CISA, the DHS, to censor me and to censor other political opponents, because we differed with the White House on policy reasons. That's very un-American. It's against the First Amendment. The judge in my case, Judge Doty, called it the worst case of censorship in American history. And those, again, are enforcement agencies that are weaponized to silence political opponents. That's not what we do in our country.
You talk a lot, of course, about the Democratic Party and weaponizing the justice system, if you will. I know you had the phone conversation that was leaked with Donald Trump a few weeks ago, kind of vetted that out, but there was also a recent report that there was conversations about being in his cabinet. Is there anything justified to that, and would you consider that role? That's part of the Republican Party at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I am in this campaign to win it, and I'm going to go to the end.
So if Donald Trump offered you, if for some reason he would win the election, would that be something you would consider?
No.
Okay. You have differing views on foreign policy depending on what's going on overseas. Ukraine, Russia war, you have Israel, Hamas. Why, when it comes to Ukraine, you aren't as forthright in defending their battle against Russia as Israel is defending their right to battle against Hamas?
They're two different wars. I believe, I think all wars are bad, and I sympathize with the people.
Okay.
It's heartbreaking, the suffering in Ukraine, the suffering in Gaza. But there are there are wars of choice, and those are immoral wars, and then there are defensive wars. Israel was attacked. Israel is now in an existential battle for its own survival. It's in a 5-front war by proxies of Iran, which has vowed to its annihilation, to the extermination of Jews in Israel, as was Hamas. It was attacked brutally. People, citizens, children, women were raped, were cooked in ovens, were burned and mutilated. And Israel has a right to defend itself like every other nation. With Ukraine,
just to follow up on Israel, I mean, you do look at their response, and there's the reports are 40,000 in Gaza have been killed, and most of those have been civilians since then.
So, but that's Hamas's fault. It's not Israel's fault. Israel is trying to get its hostages back. It has a right to do that. It has an obligation to do that. And Hamas is making a decision to use civilian shields to maximize civilian casualties in order to get the world to stop Israel. But any other nation in the world that cared about its people would say, we're going to give the hostages back and give up. Oh, I don't think you can blame Israel for that. That is feeding into Hamas's agenda, their strategy, their propaganda. If a bank robber goes into a bank and takes a bunch of hostages, and then, the police, in trying to free those hostages, police bullets kill some of them, you don't blame the police. It's the fault of the bank robber. And
people do hold those police accountable, to be fair.
Israel has a right to go in like we would, like any other nation in the world would, to find the people who declared war on it, who
or maybe
conducted
not.
those barbarous acts and crimes against them, and to make sure that to protect their population that it doesn't happen again.
Do you think it's working, what they're trying right now?
Well, is it working? I mean, I think that it's not the best strategy. It's not. I mean, it's the only thing that Israel has. How else are you going to do it if Hamas won't negotiate? Hamas, no.